Assalamualaikum and good morning. I am Nur Aina binti Shakir and metric number is 1231902. We are group 4. Today I will be presenting a book entitled Tahqid Mali Al-Hindi. First, I will briefly explain the full title of the book. The full title is Tahqid Mali Al-Hindi min Mardhulah fi Al-Aql aw Mardhulah, written by Al-Biruni around 1030th century. This work covers various fields including philosophy, religion, mathematics, astronomy, and Indian custom. According to Edward Sachau, this book is unique because it was written in Arabic and focused on Hindu philosophical thought. As a result, it has become a rare and significant work in the Islamic intellectual tradition. Next, the full name of the author is Abu Rayhan Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Biruni. He was a Persian scholar who mastered many fields such as astronomy, mathematics, physics, history, and comparative religion. One of his strengths was learning Sanskrit, which allowed him to study Hindu texts directly without depending on translation. For his background, Al-Biruni was born in 973 century in Khwarizmi and died in 1048 century. He lived during the golden age of Islamic science, when knowledge from Greek and Indian civilization was actively developed and expanded. Throughout his life, he produced more than 100 works in various fields. His contribution made him one of the most important scholars in the history of world knowledge. Next, I will explain the socio-political context of Al-Biruni's time. Al-Biruni lived during the reign of Sultan Mahmud Ghaznawi from 998 to 1030 AD. During this period, the political situation was unstable because of wars, power struggles, and cultural difference between Muslim and Hindus. He used his position in the Ghaznavid court to gain knowledge directly from Indian sources. Although he lived in a politically tense environment, he remained objective and scientific in his research. His work shows that knowledge can continue to develop even in a difficult political environment. Next, I will explain Al-Biruni's methodology in the integration of knowledge. He integrated three important sources of knowledge, which are the Quran, intellect, and nature. He used the Quran as a guide to evaluate beliefs. He also applied to intellect or Aql for critical and philosophical analysis. Besides that, he used observation and comparison to study Indian culture. By combining religion, philosophy, and science through a systematic and scientific approach, Al-Biruni produced a methodology that is still respected today. Next, I will explain the content, sources, methodology, and contributions of Al-Biruni's famous work, Tahqid Mali Al-Hindi. Firstly, regarding to the content of the book, Tahqid Mali Al-Hindi is a comprehensive study of Indian civilization. Al-Biruni did not focus only on religion, but also discussed philosophy, science, social structure, language, and custom of Indian society. In this book, he explained various aspects of Hindu beliefs and rituals, including the caste system, astronomy, mathematics, and scientific traditions that existed in India at that time. What makes this book unique is that Al-Biruni studied Indian society directly from its original sources rather than relying on assumptions or second-hand information. Because of his approach, the book is considered one of the earliest and most important works in the comparative study of religion and culture. Secondly, regarding the sources of the book, Al-Biruni mainly relied on Hindu texts and Sanskrit literature. To ensure accuracy in his research, he learned the Sanskrit language so that he could read and understand Hindu scriptures himself. He also interacted with Indian scholars and intellectuals to gain deeper knowledge about their belief and culture. Besides that, he compared Indian thought with Islamic teachings and Greek philosophy in order to identify similarities and differences between these civilizations. Moving on to the methodology, Al-Biruni applied a scientific and systematic approach in his study. His methodology was based on direct observation, mastery of language, and comparative analysis. Instead of depending on hearsay, he referred directly to Sanskrit texts and observed Indian society firsthand. He then compared the religious and intellectual traditions of India with those of Islam and Greece. This method reflects his objective, rational, and critical way of thinking. Therefore, many scholars regard Al-Biruni as one of the earliest pioneers of comparative religious studies. Now, let us look at the contribution of this book to civilization. Tahqid al-Hindi made a significant contribution because it provided one of the earliest comprehensive description of Indian culture and religion written by a foreign scholar. The book helped promote mutual understanding between Islamic and Indian civilization and reduce misunderstanding between different cultures. Furthermore, it preserved valuable information about Indian science, astronomy, mathematics, and social system. More importantly, the book highlights the importance of intellectual tolerance, fairness, and objectivity when studying other cultures and religions. Next, I will briefly discuss three examples taken from the book. The first example concerns the Hindu belief in one supreme god. In this passage, Al-Biruni explains that educated Hindus believe in one eternal and all-powerful god. This finding is important because it shows that Hindu philosophical thought includes the concept of a transcendent god and is not limited to idol worship, as often misunderstood. This example also demonstrates Al-Biruni's effort to understand Hinduism through its original sources rather than through prejudice or stereotypes. The second example discusses the social caste system in Indian society. Al-Biruni explains that Indian society was divided into different social classes and each class had its own duties and occupations. People were generally expected to remain within their assigned social position, and violating these rules could result in punishment. Through this description, Al-Biruni provides valuable information about the social organization of India during his time. Next, the third example is about knowledge and the rise and decline of civilization. According to Al-Biruni, when a civilization is prosperous and stable, people value knowledge, support scholars, and actively pursue learning. However, when a civilization declines, interest in knowledge decreases and only traces of its intellectual achievement remain. This observation highlights the close relationships between knowledge, education, and the progress of civilization. In conclusion, Tahqid al-Hindi is not only a study of Indian civilization but also a remarkable example of objective and comparative scholarship. Through his scientific methodology and open-minded approach, Al-Biruni succeeded in creating a work that continues to be valued by scholars until today.
My name is Nurul Isla binti Azmi. My matrix number 1231898. Okay, next, I will talk about the acceptance and circle of study. The Islamic intellectual tradition, Al-Biruni's work was highly respected by Muslim scholars. This is because his method of writing was scientific, objective, and systematic, and he didn't simply observe Hindu society from the outside, but he studied in a very deep and careful way. For example, Al-Biruni learned the Sanskrit language, which is the main language of Hindu religious and classical texts. By learning this language, he was able to read original Hindu sources directly. This helped him to understand Hindu belief and culture more accurately without depending on the second information. In addition, Al-Biruni used a dialogical approach, meaning he communicated and discussed with Hindu people themselves. Through this discussion, he tried to understand Hinduism from the perspective of its follower. This made his study more balanced and less biased. He also used a comparative method where he compared different religion and cultural ideas in a structured way. Because of this approach, his work is considered one of the early and important foundation in the field of comparative religion. In the Western world, Al-Biruni work also gained recognition after it was translated by the Orientalist, which is Edward Sechau. This translation helped Western scholars access his idea and understanding his academic method. As a result, his work was not only seen as an important historical source, but also as one of the early foundations in the modern comparative religious study in Western academia. According to Al-Mas'ud and Abdullah, 2021, Al-Biruni used an objective, detailed, scientific, and authentic approach in explaining Hinduism. Because of this, his work was accepted by both Muslim and non-Muslim scholars. Next, I will talk about the criticism of Kitab Malil-Hind. According to Bruce B. Lawrence, 2000, although this work is very important in the study of India and Hinduism, it still has some limitation in its methodology. First, Lawrence argued that Al-Biruni rely heavily on Brahmin information and Sanskrit texts. This means that most of his information came from the educated religious scholar rather than ordinary people in the Indian society. Because of this description of Indian life may not fully represent the daily social reality of common people. In other words, the focus of this study is more on intellectual and religious sources rather than direct observation of everyday life. Second, Lawrence also suggests that some part of the text, especially the section of Hindu ritual, may have been added later to complete the work. This raised question about whether the work fully reflects Al-Biruni's original intention. However, despite this criticism, Lawrence still acknowledged that Al-Biruni was highly systematic Islamic scholar who studied other religion in a careful and structured way. Therefore, this limitation do not reduce the importance of this kitab, but it helped other readers to understand the work within in the historical context. Next, I will explain about the history of the translation of the book. The book was originally written in Arabic around 1030 century under the title Kitab fi Tahqid Malil-Hind. The original manuscript is preserved at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. The first major translation was done by Orientalist named Edward Sachau. He translated it into German in 1883 until 1884 and later into the English in 1887 until 1888. In the English version was published in London by W. H. Allen and Co. under the title Al-Biruni's India. The book was also translated into Turkish by Kiva Medin Burslan in 1932, but it was only published in 2015. It was later translated into Urdu by Syed Asghar Ali and published by Anjuman Taraqi in Urdu in 1941. Lastly, it was translated in the new Arabic version based on the Paris manuscript was published in Hyderabad in 1958 with the support of the Indian Ministry of Education.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rin Yasmin Hanis binti Rohaizat and my metric number is 1231936. Today I want to present about current development of the book. Kitab Al-Hindi by Al-Biruni is still widely used today, especially in understanding scientific methodology and comparative religion. His objective and evidence-based approach, which is still relevant in various fields. Ahmad Fauzi, 2021, UM in Al-Biruni's Kitab Al-Hindi highlights that Kitab Al-Hindi remains an important reference in studying the relationship between religion and culture. For example, Al-Biruni learned Sanskrit so that he could understand Hinduism directly from original sources, not just rely on hearsay information from people. This shows his commitment to accuracy and fairness. Besides that, Noraini Abdullah 2022 UKM in the relevance of Al-Biruni's thought in modern comparative religion explained that Al-Biruni applied a very natural and scientific approach. For example, he successfully calculated the radius of the Earth with impressive accuracy, even without modern technology. He used mathematical methods and scientific observation, namely by measuring the height of a mountain and the angle of view to the horizon. Through trigonometric calculation, he was able to determine the size of the Earth very accurately, but the result of his calculation differed only slightly from the values known today. In addition, Muhammad Farid 2023 USM in Geographical Elements in Al-Biruni's Kitab Al-Hindi and their modern implications, Al-Biruni's studies on climate and calendar system are still referred to in historical geography today. Al-Biruni examined the differences between the Indian calendar system and the Islamic and Greek calendars. and explained how the movement of the sun and moon influenced the calculation of time. He did not simply accept information but tested and compared sources carefully, which strengthens the credibility of his findings. Lastly, Siti Zulaika 2024 IIUM in Al-Biruni's contribution to anthropological studies Kitab Al-Hindi also contributes to modern anthropology. Al-Biruni recorded Indian society in great detail such as their caste system and belief and how each class of society had different roles, responsibility and boundaries of interaction in daily life. This helps us understand the relationship between humans, culture, and the environment. Kitab Al-Hindi is not only important in the past but continues to be relevant today. It clearly shows that Al-Biruni was an influential Muslim scientist whose contributions are still valued until now. Next, for the Malay translation or study of the Kitab Tahqid Malay Al-Hindi min Maqulat Maqbula fi Al-Aql or Mardhulah by Al-Biruni, this work still does not have a fully translation in the Malay language, but many local scholars have made efforts to understand and translate its content indirectly through academic writings that are easier for modern readers. Al-Mas'ud 2021 Uniza in Abu Rayhan Al-Biruni's Study of Other Religions, a case on Hinduism explained parts of the book related to Hinduism and the belief of Indian society. Although the original text is in Arabic, the authors present it in a simplified form. Al-Biruni explained the concept of divinity in Hinduism. He distinguishes between the elite who understand it philosophically and the common people who tend towards idol worship. Al-Biruni does not judge, but he tries to understand the difference based on the level of education and access to knowledge in Indian society at that time. This difference can also be linked to the concept of hierarchy of religious understanding, that is, how a belief can be understood differently according to a person's social background. Next, Muhammad Noviani RD 2016 in IIUM, a Muslim critical thinker, also discusses Al-Biruni as a critical thinker. It highlights how Al-Biruni conducted his researches systematically. For example, he learned Sanskrit and interacted with local scholars before making conclusions, thus assessing primary sources such as Hindu scriptures and discussion with knowledgeable Brahmins. This approach can be seen as an early form of field observation and empirical analysis, which makes him more than just a historian but also a scientific researcher. In addition, most modern studies rely on the English translation by Edward Sechau, 1910, in Al-Biruni's India. He is a German Orientalist scholar who specialized in Arabic and Persian. He is also from the University of Berlin, professor of Orientalist language who teach and conducts researches on the Islamic and Asian world. This translation covers many aspects such as social custom, caste system, marriage practices, and scientific knowledge like astronomy and mathematics. For example, Al-Biruni acknowledged the expertise of Indian scholar in astronomy and explained that marriage was restricted within the same case. However, this translation has some limitation that use classical English and may be difficult to understand. Therefore, although a full Malay translation is not yet available, the efforts of modern scholars have made the contents of Kitab Al-Hindi more understandable, especially for today's student and researcher. So overall, Kitab Al-Hindi by Al-Biruni is a very important work because he studied the religion, culture and knowledge of the Indian society scientifically. Even though there were many conflicts and war at that time, Al-Biruni still maintained a neutral attitude and tried to understand based on the original sources. This work also combines religion, reason and observation and is the basis for comparative religious studies today. That's all from me. Thank you.